Well, good evening and welcome to our Wednesday prayer video. On Monday, the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church in Ireland meets for the first time since June 2019. Here's a little bit of video to show you what it was like back then. Well, since those days and the effects of the pandemic and lockdown, a standing commission of the General Council has had to meet to make necessary immediate decisions. But there remain lots of things for the church at large to discuss as now once again ministers and representative elders from the 500 plus congregations across Ireland gather in assembly buildings from Monday to Wednesday. Jean McClune and I will be there on behalf of SRPC. You might begin by praying for the practicalities of all of this. With the potential numbers coming and yet all the restrictions, it'll be spread across 3 big halls, the main one and 2 others in assembly buildings, with video links and protocols for people to be able to get up and take part. It'll also be live streamed for anyone who wants to watch. You can imagine, can't you, all that's involved to make all of that happen. Do pray for the people organising and putting all the practicalities into place. The clerk and the deputy clerk of the assembly, that's Trevor Gribben and David Allen. For Roy Mackey and Mervyn Burnside, who have been looking after all the organising and the organising committees. For Raymond Robinson, who's the man who looks after all the buildings at assembly buildings. And there's lots of other workers and administrators and contributors too. Do pray for great safety and protection through it all. Pray for David Bruce, who will officially begin a 2nd year of being moderator. The assembly opens with a service at 11:30 on Monday morning. And as you would have seen in that clip, that was previously when all the moderators dressed in all their finery would have paraded in. There'll be a little less pomp and ceremony this time, but nevertheless a little bit. And on Monday morning, he'll reflect on the year past. And having been reinstalled as part of that service, he'll then preach about Christ, our hope in this coming year. Across the 3 days until Wednesday tea time and on into the evenings as well, there are a whole number of matters which will be discussed. There's going to be reports and discussions, and you can see this annual report book of all the reports and discussions and things to be discussed comes out to everybody who's attending for a good read through beforehand and discussion during the 3 days. There's going to be discussions and reports emanating from big decisions made 2 or 3 years ago. You'll perhaps remember some of them. There'll be a framework for discussion coming for Kirk sessions on what is a credible profession of faith. There'll be guidelines for pastoral care of same-sex attracted people and their families, and also a biblical framework and guidelines for the pastoral care of people who struggle with gender identity. All of these have been discussed at some level and at presbytery level, and they're coming back with suggestions and amendments for final discussion at the General Assembly, or potentially final discussion. There are also going to be recommendations about consistency in the vows used for baptism and calling people into full membership across the church. Funnily enough, there'll be proposals about how we go about making decisions and expressing dissent from those decisions in PCI. These are all big discussions. Do pray for wisdom and godliness in them all. Undoubtedly, there'll be reflections for the church at large and for congregations on the challenges and opportunities of doing things differently and doing different things because of the pandemic. We're going to be thankful for resources that have helped congregations during lockdown, but also thinking about what will help in a period of transition going forward. There'll be discussion about mission in Ireland, about chaplaincy in hospitals, in prisons, in the armed forces, in universities, where there are opportunities, but also real challenges in an increasingly secular culture in all of these institutions. Talk about church planting and revitalisation of churches and things that are happening in that regard. The development of things like the International Meeting Point and the hope to appoint a rural chaplain to work with those living in a farming context. There'll be discussion about ministry training, with Gordon now as the new principal of Union College coming up to his first full year, but emerging from COVID restrictions, but with lots of new courses and a new look to the staff team at Union College, and 35 ministry students, which is the highest number for several years and a real answer to prayer. We'll talk about social care and witness of the church. The church's work in disability services, for older people services, and safeguarding and specialist services amongst different vulnerable groups. There'll be discussion about our place in the public square, looking to be a gracious, confident gospel engagement, but on issues such as dealing with the past in Northern Ireland, the marking of the 100-year centenary, especially with the Union College playing a part in those early days where the Assembly first met. There'll be engagement in education in the North and the South, the Dying with Dignity Bill in the Republic, and other matters of human dignity and welfare and well-being. As ever, there'll be discussion about finance and resources. Do pray for David Thompson, who heads up the Support Services Committee. We talk about finance and staffing and operations in assembly buildings, and lots of difficult decisions to be made about that going on. Also about the United Appeal and the money the church gathers in and the funding of the work of the councils and of mission, given the pressures of the last year or two. There'll also be a bit of conversation and debate about the investments that we make. And there we might start to think more globally, and we should and we will across the Assembly. There's 29 global mission workers across 11 countries in the world, as well as partnerships with other mission agencies. And the church will have to continue to reflect on global development issues, on how we respond to international needs, how we form good relations, how we steward God's good creation. As well as the Monday worship service, there'll be a communion service on a Tuesday at lunchtime. And towards the end of the assembly, we'll take time to listen to the global church. It'll be a time of worship and reflection. That'll involve some recorded greetings and messages from leaders in Zambia and Indonesia and Afghanistan, and also some Iranian children leading prayers for their Afghan sisters and brothers.
خدایا دعا میکنم برای مردان افغانستان که دیگه جنگ نشه و اذیتشون نکنن و مثل ما راحت باشن. بعد میخوام که دختراشون رو اذیت نکنن، مثل ما شاد باشن، درس بخونن، بازی کنن. دیگه نباید اذیتشون کنن، گناه دارن اونا هم مثل ما.
As you can imagine, a lot will be squeezed into these 3 days. Please pray for our church, that we might recognise Christ as Lord in all our discussions and decisions, that the Spirit may guide with all wisdom and grace and bring about fruitful outcomes, but also a united, humble church, confident in Christ and in Christ alone, our hope, and wanting to bring his gospel to bear in the society and the world around us. You can find more information about what's happening and follow that live stream at www.presbyterianireland.org. But do pray for some of these things, even watch back and pause and pray for some of the things that I mentioned. Your prayers will be much valued and needed for our church at large. Thank you.